Thank you very much.
Thank you for asking us. We appreciate that. Thank you very much.
You.
Take care.
Okay, now we have Duncan Dollimore from Cycling UK. And Duncan has done loads of work with both Mark and myself as on Cycling UK. He's in charge of campaigns, and I've got to say, and I'll big Duncan up here, that if it wasn't for Duncan Cycling UK, the BHS probably would not have been involved in the initial highway code changes and getting in on that group to ensure that we were involved with pedestrians and cyclists. So a very, very close relationship between Cycling UK and the BHS. And long may it continue. So Duncan, thank you very much for coming along here, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Alan, and welcome everybody. I will just do the technical bit of sharing my screen, and if you could just let me know, Alan, I think we now should be seeing a slide saying Cycling UK, BHS Access and Safety. Is that being shared now?
It is. It's not on the slideshow, but we can see the slide. If you go down the left-hand side and you can just switch the slides, we can see that. It's sort of showing you whole screen.
Oh, right. 2 seconds. I will. I'll stop sharing, put it on slideshow, and share again, and it should be sharing properly there.
It's not, but it doesn't matter. If you just go down the left-hand side,
I'll do that.
We've got the big screen of the slide. Okay, Duncan. Okay. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Alan. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Duncan Dollimore. I'm head of campaigns at Cycling UK. I'm going to speak mainly about our partnership with BHS today and the work we've done together. But very briefly, a little bit about us. Cycling UK is a membership charity. We have just over 70,000 members. We've been around for about 148 years. So we've been around a long time in different guises. Although our members are people, obviously, who cycle, our charitable purpose is very much around those who might cycle, if they thought the roads were safer, or if they thought there were more places, for example, off-road where they might. So there's our core membership and the things that we would like to achieve. So there's lots of overlaps with British Horse Society. I'm asked quite often to speak at conferences. Sometimes I say yes because I feel I have to, but I really, really enjoy speaking at these. The last time I spoke at this conference was the one just before COVID. So it's great to be back speaking to you today in relation to this, partly because when people join Cycling UK and they ask me about our partnerships, what I always say is that one of the best that we have is with British Horse Society. And that's because of the people involved and the work that we do. In relation to partnerships, I was trying to think of a clever analogy as to why partnerships in campaigning were important. And it suddenly dawned on me that the most obvious thing was just the process of riding a horse. There's a quote here in relation to silent partisan learning people's language. Some of you might think, well, what's that got to do with road users? We're all speaking the same language. Actually, I sometimes feel that we're not, and some of the conversations feel that there's some very, very different perspectives in relation to things, which is why it's very important when we're doing our campaigning work that we look at partnerships and looking at things from different perspectives. In terms of partnership work, there are exceptions, but usually organisations like Cycling UK and British Horse Society have more success when they are campaigning or lobbying in partnership with somebody else. And part of the reason for that is that we all have slightly different audiences and we have slightly different areas of influence. You may, as members of British Horse Society, have your own view about your membership, but the public, lots of them will have their own stereotype of what they think of your membership and their stereotype of what they think of ours. They may be wrong, but they will have that stereotype. But if we're doing something together, we are embracing and capturing the support of a much wider group of people. And it's the same when Alan and I or Mark and I are trying to get the interest and support of politicians for various things. A few years ago, Cycling UK went to a huge amount of effort to arrange a parliamentary debate about vulnerable road user road safety in Westminster. We did a lot of great work in relation to it. It's quite hard getting MPs to sponsor those debates, but we hadn't done the most important bit. We hadn't done the most important bit, which was actually get enough MPs going along. I spoke to Alan about 4 days before the debate, and he very successfully arranged for dozens of MPs to come along who were interested in British Horse Society's particular road safety issues. Now, the reality was that benefited both organisations. We had a debate which was then covered by media. We had a proper number of people attending. We had people raising different perspectives in relation to people walking, people cycling, people riding people riding horses. It benefited everybody, but actually the different organisations contributed differently. There are things that British Horse Society do better than Cycling UK. There are things that we are quite good at. Working in partnership, you can capture those together and make the most of your opportunities. And the perspectives point is really important in terms of the road safety work that we do. It's very easy, if you're a cyclist or a horse rider, to imagine that everybody else understands the particular point or problem that you're facing. I remember a few years ago when Alan and I were doing lots of campaigning in relation to, on BHS's side, the Dead Slow campaign, on Cycling UK's side, a campaign called Too Close for Comfort, which was about overtaking cyclists. My daughter was learning to drive at the time, and I think she was in the car with me when I overtook some cyclists, and I could see her thinking, he's going very slowly and he's giving them lots of space. And I ended up with a conversation with her saying, has anybody in all of the driving lessons that you've taken that I've paid for had any conversation with you about overtaking cyclists? This was before the highway code changes. And the answer was no. And I then said, has anybody mentioned anything to you about what you do when you come across a horse on the road? And the answer was no. And then I said, has anybody talked to you about particular vulnerable pedestrians, what you might do, or if you see somebody with a white stick on the pavement? And the answer was no. And I asked her whether anybody had talked to her about parking and parking on the pavement and what that meant for people in wheelchairs. And the answer was no. And so, being a boring dad working in road safety, I asked about 7 of her mates who were doing their driving lessons at the time, and the answer was no from all 7 of them. So they're people who haven't actually been exposed to, or hadn't at the time been exposed to, the perspective of a different road user. And that's why the partnership work that we do is so important, because it's putting yourselves in the shoes of somebody else to see what it means for them. So just jumping through the slides, a couple of examples of the things that we've partnered on over the years. I've already mentioned safety in relation to road safety issues. We've also done work on awareness and better behaviour by people cycling, and I'll come to that in a minute, and also work more with Mark in relation to improving off-road access for those who have higher rights of access, so that the higher rights users, cyclists, horse riders. So I'm going to speak a little bit briefly about all the work that we've done on those 3 areas. So starting with safety, there's a slide here which shows a bit of a grainy image of a horse and a car. It's grainy because it's a 2D capture of a 3D image. It's about 6 years ago that British Horse Society did one of the most innovative things in road safety educational awareness for decades, as the first organisation, road safety organisation, to produce a virtual reality road safety film. If that doesn't seem that relevant to some of you, I'll just go back to my children, now adults. The only thing I've done in 9 years at Cycling UK that's ever interested them, and their mates have been interested in, is the virtual reality films we've produced. So the work that BHS did, which Cycling UK nicked and copied, actually engaged a much younger audience in road safety educational awareness. That film was groundbreaking. And Alan and I had lots of conversations at the time in relation to how we did road safety educational awareness. The road safety sector has been a bit old-fashioned for decades in relation to how to communicate road safety messages. There's been a lot of telling, and there's a quote that Alan uses in a lot of presentations he does, which some of you might have heard, but I'm going to nick it again because the best ideas can be stolen. And it's tell me and I will forget. Teach me and I may remember. Involve me and I will understand. And that's been a bit of a golden thread that BHS and Cycling UK have had with all of our road safety educational work over the last 7 or 8 years. It's really interesting. I don't mind admitting, and I'm sure Alan would admit, I don't think we went away and read the behavioural science on this at the time. But there's loads of behavioural science papers being produced by universities and academics, which in more intelligent academic language are making the exact point we were making several years ago, that long-term behaviour change takes time and you have to get people to understand it. And all the research now on road safety education, and lots of it on similar things like fire safety, is shock tactics don't work. They may get somebody to change their immediate behaviour, but you need to get people to understand. And that's what we've been trying to do in a lot of the road safety work that we've done, which was the work we did leading up to the highway codes changes. BHS had a dead slow campaign in relation to overtaking horse riders. We had a too close for comfort campaign, which was in relation to overtaking cyclists. And we've always tried to engage different audiences. So the strategy BHS have had is not to try and convince people who ride horses in relation to these issues. It's to go out to motoring conferences and motoring road shows. And we've tried to do the same thing. And both organisations have done quite a bit of work with driving schools. I lost my words for a second there, with driving schools. So the situation that I was explaining with my daughter several years ago is less likely to occur today, because the work done around the highway code means there's much better education being given to people taking their driving test in relation to vulnerable road users, be it horse riders, pedestrians or cyclists. Probably sensible that if I jump at this point to the highway code, because Alan did mention to me that it would be great if I addressed some questions that might be around in relation to whether the changes to the highway code have worked or are working. That reminded me of a pretty frustrating conversation we've been having with the government in Northern Ireland over the last few months. The highway code changes applied across Great Britain, England, Scotland and Wales, but strangely not Northern Ireland. That's because Northern Ireland has a highway code which almost mirrors the GB highway code, but it usually catches up a couple of years later. But on this occasion, they've not yet caught up. So we've been trying to get them to implement changes to the highway code that benefit cyclists, horse riders and others in Northern Ireland. And we've had some very strange questions from civil servants and ministers on the lines of, can you give me the data and evidence to say this has worked? And I've been trying to explain to people that changing ingrained behaviour doesn't happen overnight. If somebody's been driving for 30 years and the rules change on the 30th of January and they're not particularly well communicated, it's unlikely that you're going to have everybody changing their behaviour on the next day. We have a situation where everybody taking their driving test for the past 2 years and 9 months has been taught a new set of rules. But those who passed their driving test before then have not. And unfortunately, the highway code changes were not properly communicated. We can do so much as a cycling organisation to communicate the changes. British Horse Society can do work in relation to that and have done. We have our own particular audiences and our own budget issues. But when you have the most major changes to the highway code for 50 years, what was required was a major public awareness campaign. The Department for Transport had a budget of about 1.5 million. I appreciate that sounds to many people a lot of money, but if you think about the budgets that we have for larger communications campaigns, if you think about how much when the drink drive laws came in place, that was communicated on television and on wider channels, a 1.5 million budget is not great across the UK. The last time I looked at the Department for Transport figures for the cost of every road death in the UK, it was around 2.9 million per death, and we have 1,700 of them every year. So less money was spent communicating the most major changes to the highway code than one of 1,700 deaths per year costs the economy. So we have had some problems in relation to communication of the changes, which have limited how quickly the benefits can be seen. That said, it's really interesting that it's folk in Northern Ireland, ministers and civil servants, who are asking me to prove whether the changes have worked when road deaths and casualties in Northern Ireland have gone up in the last 2.5 years. And in England, Wales and Scotland, they've been on a gradual downward trend. I don't want to get too excited about that because it's painfully slow, but it is reducing. It is reducing for cyclists. I'm sure Mark and Alan will be the first to say it's difficult to track that for horse riders because annoyingly and stupidly, the casualty statistics that the Department for Transport collate don't really deal with horse incidents, which is why you try and collect your own information. But obviously that's dependent on variables about what is and is not reported. But broadly, casualties are going down, which tends to suggest that the highway code changes are having an impact. We haven't crowed about that loudly because we're conscious that it's early days and it's quite difficult to prove cause and effect, but there are early signs that it's starting to have an impact, but it might take some time for the full impact to be felt in terms of all drivers' behaviour. I'll jump at that point to the awareness work that we've done. I'm sure there's many people listening in today who have a tale of an experience with a cyclist behaving irresponsibly around horses or horse riders or a group of cyclists. So just putting this out there straight away, it is not my task to defend irresponsible cyclists. There are idiots on our roads. There are irresponsible people on our roads. Some of them are driving, some of them cycle. It is a fact of life that we have to deal with irresponsible people. I'd like to think that our members are probably in the cohort of people who are responsible around cyclists, but on discussions, or horse riders, but in discussions with Alan and Mark several years ago, we agreed we needed to do more in relation to responsible behaviour by people cycling, both on and off road, which is why we came up with the Be Nice, Say Hi initiative. Sometimes the best campaign ideas are the simplest. And this was a very simple, very cheap idea that simply required goodwill and cooperation from both sides. We cooperated the production of 2 films, one off-road and one on-road, to describe and explain how people should behave when cycling around horse riders. And we produced all these signs, which are on a number of trails across the UK. And on the perspective and awareness point, the reason I've put the 3 brains quote at the top of this slide is that this will be something that's obvious to all of you who ride horses. But the first time Alan mentioned the word 3 brains to me, it was news to me. I hadn't quite thought through in my head that when you meet somebody riding a horse, there's an interaction of 3 brains, the person on a bike, the horse, and the person riding the horse. And it's so self-evident and obvious when you say it. But if you haven't ridden a horse, and I'm not a horse rider, you don't think about it. And that's informed all of our education and awareness to people who cycle, because once you give them that explanation, it's a bit of a penny drop in relation to things, and they understand the position. Finally, in terms of the work that we've collaborated on, lots of work with Mark in relation to access reform. The images on here will resonate with a number of you, I'm sure, from a horse riding perspective. The image on the left, the track on the left in that image is a footpath. You can't ride a horse on it. You can't ride a bike on it. The track on the right that has somebody coming down it is the bridle way. It should be the other way round. If it was based on suitability, the one on the left would be the bridle way, the one on the right would be the footpath. But our rights of way are designated, as most of you know, by historic use and so in historic classification. So we've had a lot of work with British Horse Society raising those points in relation to access reform, both in relation to rights of way and also in relation to access on open access land. There's a particular estate we highlighted in West Yorkshire, the Bolton Abbey estate, where there is literally 100 miles of metalled track across the Duke of Devonshire's estate there's open access land that people should be able to cycle on or ride a horse on, because people drive landowners on that same land. And that's the collaborative work that we've done with British Horse Society to highlight those particular issues and ensure that in the access reform debate, the position and voice of people riding horses and cycling is heard. And that takes us to, I think, my final slide about making sure we're heard on the access debate, which takes us back to the whole partnership issue. Earlier this year, there was a partnership formed, Outdoors for All, that British Horse Society and Cycling UK are members of. This is an organisation pushing for wider access reform. It's the first time in my lifetime in this particular in this job and in relation to the access issue that it really feels like access reform is going to be on the table in England. It was on the way in Wales a few years ago, but we've struggled to make the progress we wanted. But it is now getting back on the table in England. But it's important that there are wider coalitions pressing for that in terms of wider health benefits, which is why the coalition of, I think now 40 organisations is particularly important. So there will be some generic messages that are required through that coalition in relation to the benefits of outdoor access generally. But within that, I suppose BHS and Cycling UK are the organisations making the specific points in relation to cyclists and horse riders, and the bridle way points and the open access rights points. I hope that's been useful. I think my 20 minutes is sort of coming to an end, so I'll end in a moment. I'll end by saying it really is a pleasure to come and speak to you today. Our relationship and partnership with British Horse Society is probably my favourite one in my working job. It's been a pleasure to work with the people involved in the organisation over the years. I genuinely do believe that we are able to achieve much more when we work together than when we plough our own particular furrow. I'll pass over there, but if anybody's got any questions today or subsequently by email, I'm more than happy to answer them. Should I pass back to you, Alan?
Yeah, thanks very much, Duncan. Lots of love coming through for you there on the chat, and I know Mark would say exactly the same thing. There is so much that we share in trying to get the awareness of our individual modes of transport out there, and I can't overemphasize the support that we got from you and Roger from Cycling UK about getting us into that cycling and walking investment strategy, but also the group that did the highway code changes. And this is something that I think not enough people know about because that was hard work, and having a seat at the table when the discussions were being made about significant, as Duncan said, significant changes to the highway code, albeit advice. But and the other thing that you mentioned, which I was going to talk about later on in the day, we've got our own statistics about the incidents involving horses and injuries to riders and horses. And yes, it's too early to really sort of make a proper judgment on this. But maybe, just maybe, we are seeing a downward turn, and that could well be to do with the highway code. So, a question for you, Duncan. I mean, how do you think that we can influence the new government even more? Do you think that they are? I know they're going to produce a road safety strategy, or hopefully they are. How do you think we can influence even more as regards cyclists and horse riders?
I think I'll answer that in two ways. The first is a broader one in relation to road safety. I think it never hurts to appeal to the vanity of politicians. The reality is, in the 10 years before, this isn't a party political point, it's just a statement of fact. In the 10 years before the Cameron coalition government came in, there had been about a 43% reduction in road deaths. And in the 14 years since, it's been about an 8 or 9%. And the reason for that is because road safety ceased to be a priority, and the government stopped having targets for reducing casualties. And everybody in road safety has said that for the last 13 or 14 years. It was downplayed. And I think there is a vanity thing about saying to the current government, you actually did quite a good job the last time you were in on this. Are you going to take it seriously this time? So that's, I think, a nudge that we can do. In terms of the specific cycling and horse rider position, I think there is a requirement to put this in the context of the most vulnerable on the road. And so we've done a great job, I think, our two organisations, of speaking with one voice. I do think we need to bring some of the pedestrian organisations and the disability organisations into that conversation as well, because the more people from different groups that are raising that particular point, it makes it stronger. And we all have our own particular interests, but I think there's an advantage to us of doing more in that field.
Right, nice one. Question from Phil Wadey here. Do you have a way of alerting your members, Cycling UK members, to our local campaigns, for example, collecting evidence of the use of a path? He thinks that many paths for which the cycling evidence is so much higher than equestrians, but together we could be recording bridleways more easily. That needs a way of reaching cyclists.
We do. We have something called the Cycle Advocacy Network, which is our network of local campaigners, and we can post information on a forum in relation to that they will see. We have members who, if I'm honest about it, are less interested in our campaigning than others, but we also have a hardcore group of members who are more interested in campaigning, and we have a newsletter to them, so we can circulate information to them in relation to those issues. So if people have information they want to share, they can get in touch with us. My email is not particularly imaginative. It's on the last slide, duncan.dollimore@cyclinguk.org. So please feel free to send me any information and we can share that with our local campaigners.
No, that's great, Duncan. Thank you very much. We're coming to the ends now, you've covered a lot of points. Both Mark and I, look forward to working with you even more. So thanks, Duncan, for your time. And I'm just going to hand over to Mark for a message to our viewers about luncheon.
Yes, thank you very much, Alan. A fascinating morning of speakers. And we're now going to go into a lunch break. And during lunch, there is a chat room for anyone who wants to have a more informal chat with other delegates. That's once you've grabbed something to eat. This session will not be recorded, but you will see something being posted in the chat about how to join the networking session. You will need to join via your laptop if you want to. Charlotte and Evie will be allowing people's cameras, microphones, but they'll need to be patient as it's a manual job. So if you want to join the networking session, please have a look in the chat. And we're now going to have a break until 1:15. So if I could ask you all to be back at 1:15 promptly, suitably refreshed, that would be great. And thank you all very much. And especially a final big thank you to all of our speakers this morning. Thank you.